Thank you,
I'll move WAIS.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to move immediately to Evelyn Aleman, and then we'll have our break. Where's my talking into the void there? We'll move immediately to Evelyn Aleman, who is from the San Fernando Valley. She's originally from. Are you from El Salvador? Or your family is from El. Okay, she's U.S. born and bred, but her family background is from El Salvador. I met Evelyn many years ago when we were children. That was the joke we were making at WAIS in 2001. And I don't know about myself, but Evelyn has not changed a bit since then. And oh well, thank you. You're very nice. She's a long time veteran WAISer, and my only complaint about Evelyn, I wish she would write more for the forum, but it's great that she made the trip and she's here with her family. And Evelyn is the president of Media Image Public Relations. It's in Los Angeles, and she is very instrumental in policy reform and education reform. I don't have an exact title of your talk for today, but
it's education reform K through 12.
Education reform K through 12, and Evelyn will be the first speaker in our education panel, which will also include presentations from Chica Ramirez, from Tamara Zuniga Brown, and from our own Randy Black, who I believe stepped out. And here's Evelyn.
Thank you, John. I'm so excited to be here, and I remember a lot of you. You don't remember me, but I do. I remember Macario too, and Mr. Diaz over there, I see, and Tim Brown. I remember you too, and I remember a lot of the discussions we had back when I was here, 2006 and 2009, and I remember Dr. Hilton and his legacy of work. And thank you so much, John, for all the work that you do, and I love to read the comments on WAIS.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. So I'm going to talk today about education reform in the K through 12 system here in the state of California, and why we should be concerned about that, how it impacts higher institutions of learning. I know a lot of you here are professors, so it's crucial. I'd love to hear your input on what I'm going to talk about. Like this? Yeah? Is it too loud? Okay. So, okay, good. So, this one? Okay. All right. Okay. So I will talk about the evolution of the education reform movement here in California over the last 10 years, and why it's important not just to us but to the rest of the country. And then I'll talk about a case that's taking place right now in the state that will have an impact on the way that we look at hiring teachers in the state and across the country as well. It's called the Vergara lawsuit. So I will talk about education over the last 10 years, its evolution, the reform movement, and I'll play a video Thank you for your patience. I think technology is great, but sometimes it just doesn't work for us for some reason, or not as quickly as we'd like it to. Of course, that never happens in WAIS.
Never.
No.
I have to share IPER's first law of instructional technology, and that is simple. It will always bite you in the ass.
So I think what I'll do is, while Roman continues to help me with the technology, I'll talk a little bit about how the reform movement has evolved in California. So about 10 years ago, actually 11, I launched my PR agency, and we do specifically public affairs and public policy. And I got a call from the Los Angeles Unified School District, and they're the second largest school district in the country, as many of you may know. And I got a call from the school board president at that time, and he said, I need you to come down because we have this huge multi-billion-dollar construction program. And said, for whatever reason, the media isn't picking it up, and we need to raise awareness about how important this is.
We have great teachers.
Okay, it's there. Okay, so I'll tell you afterwards.
But we also have teachers that are failing our students, that perhaps should not be in teaching. And how does the state address that? Because the way they've been addressing it does not work for the kids. It works for the teachers to have that job and stay in that job.
Meet Julia Macias, a high school freshman who lives in California's San Fernando Valley.
I plan on going to an Ivy League college such as Harvard or MIT, most likely leaning towards the sciences like astronomy or physics.
And while Julia is currently on the honor roll, there are times when it seemed like her effort wasn't paying off.
Being a kid in the California system right now is a lot like the lottery. You might get an amazing teacher one year, and then a not so amazing teacher, and you see your scores are reflected upon that. Because I remember having my scores go up and down. Like I'd score really well one year, and then the next year I'd go down like 200 points, which is a big gap.
So when she was in the second grade, Julia's parents went to meet with her teacher and got a surprising response.
Her teacher, mentioned that she's just not good at math. That there are kids that are good at math and there's that are not, and she wasn't one of them. Because maybe she had a learning disability. That she did all that she could.
So Julia's parents got her switched to a different class where she flourished.
She's telling me, coming home excited, doing her work, and she says, Dad, oh my God, I never knew there were so many ways of doing things. And I thought, what can you attribute that to? Because it's the same girl. The settings change. Different teacher.
The Macias' experience with ineffective teachers led them to join 8 other students and become part of a lawsuit known as Vergara versus California. The case took on labor statutes that make it difficult to get rid of underperforming teachers, including the permanent employment statute, which gives a teacher tenure after just 16 months on the job, and the last in first out statute, which forces districts to lay off teachers based on seniority and not performance. In fact, the dismissal process is so convoluted that experts testified that out of 275,000 teachers in California, only 2 are dismissed each year on average for unsatisfactory performance. And the process itself can cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. In a ruling last June that was widely hailed by education reformers, a Superior Court judge found in favor of the plaintiffs, writing, substantial evidence presented makes it clear to this court that the challenge statutes disproportionately affect poor and/or minority students. The evidence is compelling. Indeed, it shocks the conscience. The California Federation of Teachers denounced the verdict and vowed to appeal the decision.
We believe the judge fell victim to the anti-union, anti-teacher rhetoric of one of America's finest corporate law firms that set out to scapegoat teachers for the real problems that exist in public education.
In California, teachers obtain permanent employment by law after only 16 months on the job.
Joshua Lipschutz, a lawyer with Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, argued on behalf of the plaintiffs.
And the dismissal statutes are really what make up in some ways some of the core protections of teacher tenure in California, because they create an extraordinarily difficult set of hurdles that a school district must clear in order to dismiss a teacher for any reason.
So I'm tenured right now, but if I do break the law, or if I'm acting inappropriately, I can still be dismissed. It's not a guarantee for life.
Gabriela Ibarra is a 5th grade teacher in Los Angeles and a member of the California Federation of Teachers. She's been in the classroom for 18 years and hopes the Vergara ruling will be overturned.
We're focusing on performance by just test scores versus looking at the whole picture. Every child comes in differently with different experiences and backgrounds and skills. And for us to expect every teacher to bring every student up to level takes time. Taking our rights away doesn't help us be better at what we're doing. It's just putting a negative image to everybody else that we're not doing our job properly.
But the Vergara case isn't about taking away a teacher's right to tenure, nor is there any system in the United States that relies solely on test scores to evaluate a teacher in the classroom.
Their own experts testified that 3 to 5 years would be a better amount of time to decide whether a teacher is deserving of tenure, which just makes sense. It gives teachers more of a chance to prove themselves, and it gives school districts more of an opportunity to look at data and see how the students of those teachers are performing. Instead, the teachers' unions really spent the whole case focusing on why tenure as a concept is important. And that's something that really was not at issue in this case.
In fact, many of the teachers used as examples of poor performance in the Vergara case displayed numerous indicators of incompetence that did not rely on student performance, a fact that was supported by many educators during the trial.
Throughout the entire case, we had lots of teachers who came out to support us, testified on our behalf, and really explained both to the public and to the court, to the judge, that having ineffective teachers in their schools and in their midst is terrible for them and terrible for the profession.
As the decision moves through the appeals process, the Vergara ruling has already prompted advocacy groups in other states to take action. Last month, a group of families filed a similar lawsuit in New York, and cases are expected to be filed in Connecticut, Maryland, Oregon, New Mexico, Idaho, and Kansas. Though it could take years for the courts to make a final ruling, Julia Macias is busy focusing on her future.
I do have another goal of making kids aware that they can and do have the ability to succeed in life with the right type of education. I find it very important to have that goal heard and my voice heard.
Click below to see more from Reason TV.
Where do we begin? This is a big issue, a behemoth. So I think you might know by now that Julia Macias is my daughter, and that we are very much involved in this issue to change public school education in our state and in our country. And I just want to say that I like this video from Reason TV because I think it shows both sides. And I think that's very important to us because the way that this issue has been framed has been to present it as an attack on teachers and an attack on the teachers' union. And that's not what this is about. This is about an effort by parents and students who for decades, especially in low-income communities throughout the state of California, but really it affects everybody. It's not one that discriminates by zip code. And these parents and these students have tried to raise awareness about the need of quality instruction in the classroom for decades, to little or no avail. And I know the teacher in the video, who I met by the way, talked about teachers being fired if the school district so sees it fit. And I want to say that that's a play on words. Because yes, there is a dismissal procedure in the state of California. If, let's say, there's a teacher in the classroom who plays movies for the students the whole day. Okay, we have teachers like that. They'll go and they'll play videos. We have amazing teachers, let me make that clear, but we also have teachers who don't go in to teach. And a principal can begin the dismissal process, but it doesn't mean that after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, an investment of $250,000 to $450,000 at the end of that process that the teacher will be let go. It just won't happen. As you saw in the video, out of 275,000 teachers, maybe 2 will be let go, right? 2.2%. So I'll take you back 10 years ago when I got the call from the school board president of LAUSD, and he said, I need you to come in because, you know, for whatever reason, we're not being able to talk about all of these new schools that we're building. So I went to the LA Times and I said, why aren't you covering this? And they said, well, we're not having a pretty open discussion with the school board. They're not being open about money and education, instruction, all the issues that we think we need to be reporting about. What we discovered together between the media, the policymakers, and nonprofit organizations, education advocacy organizations, was that we were seeing the students fail and we couldn't figure out how to help them. So together, all of these stakeholders thought, well, if we build new schools or we refurbish the old schools, we'll see student outcomes improve. So in some instances, we had neighborhoods that were, maybe the schools were about 100 years old, and they could hold about 1,500 students, but they were holding up to 4,000 students. So we knew we do need new schools in these areas, and we built them. But over the course of 4 or 5 years after they were built, we didn't see any improvement in the scores. So then this whole coalition of key stakeholders said, well, let's go back and maybe it's the school structure. We need to break down the schools. Let's do small schools. So LAUSD experimented. They created, you know, pilot schools. They have the magnet schools, but within the magnets we have highly gifted and gifted magnets. And they said, well, let's do themed schools. Maybe, you know, the kids aren't engaged. How about we create schools around STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? How about we create schools around liberal arts? Because some kids just would be interested in the liberal arts versus the sciences, or architecture and design. So they went to work, and, you know, we broke out the schools from the traditional model into varying smaller school models, and that was great, but we just didn't see a huge improvement in the scores. They said, well, maybe let's do choice. Maybe we need to have more charter schools. Let's offer that as well. And I mean, that idea initiated from the teachers union, really. So why not? And it was teacher-led. Many of the charter schools are teacher-led, and they're free public schools. So I said, okay. And we saw some great competition, and we saw an increase in some of the student scores in some cases in some of the charter schools, but it wasn't enough. So the coalition said, well, what about college preparatory courses? We discovered that not all high schools were offering students college preparatory courses. So the LAUSD passed a resolution that said, let's make sure that every kid in every high school has college prep courses. And it happened over the course of 10 years. But the problem was that there was a white elephant in the room. We offered the kids the college preparatory courses, but we didn't look at the quality of instruction that they were receiving in the classroom. So when that issue came to the forefront, after 10 years of trying this and trying that, it became scandalous, right? Because all of a sudden we were saying, wait a minute, maybe it's not these other factors, maybe it's the instruction. And at that point, we heard a lot about, well, it's the poverty. It's the poverty that's causing these inequities in education. And you have a large number of English language learners, so that's got to be it. But then we discovered in the last 10 years that there are schools, elementary and middle schools, in areas of poverty, low income, high crime, unsafe, violence, and they're surpassing LAUSD's overall district scores in education, in math, English language arts, and in the sciences. So what are they doing? What are they doing different that traditional schools haven't been doing for the longest time? And we discovered that in those schools, it's the principal working together with the teachers and the parents. And it's been a very big shift in the way that we're looking at education right now among all of these key stakeholders. But it wasn't enough, because LAUSD couldn't replicate that. It can't force any of the teachers to take special classes or instruction or consider new ways of teaching. It can only make a recommendation. The teachers it's up to them whether or not they want to take that approach or those courses or those recommendations or not. So it's a very complex issue. It's much too much for parents and students to understand. So 3 years ago, there was a search for plaintiffs by an organization called Students Matter. And of course, we've been doing this work for about 10 years in low-income communities. And we live in a very comfortable part of the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. And we never thought, that's not going to happen to us. We have great schools with great scores. But it did. It didn't just happen to us. It happened to several parents and several students. And when it happened to us, we thought, oh, it's not just about the zip code. It's not just about the kids in South Los Angeles. It's not just about kids in East Los Angeles. This really is affecting everybody in California. And when we met with parents from up north, and we met with parents from San Diego, all different socioeconomic status, all diversity. I flew all the way to Tennessee, and I met some of the parents who are suing the state of Louisiana. They were at a conference there. The state of New York. I realized that we all have the same issues in common. So how do we change this? Well, we couldn't do it through the assembly. We'd all tried that. We couldn't do it through the school districts because we realized that these changes, were needed to take place in the education code for the state of California. And the only way to do that was through the courts. So, as you saw in the video, our family, together with 8 other families, launched this case, this lawsuit against the state of California, and presented overwhelming evidence. In fact, we had support from teachers and wonderful academics. Thank you, from across the country. And we were able to prove to the judge that the long-term impacts of having ineffective teachers in the classrooms is substantive. So I'm just going to read a few statistics for you real quickly. So one of the witnesses in the case is Dr. Thomas Kane, a professor of education and economics at Harvard School of Education. And Dr. Kane said that a student assigned to a grossly ineffective math teacher in Los Angeles loses 11.73 months of learning per year compared to a student assigned to a teacher of average effectiveness. He also said that a student assigned to a grossly ineffective English language arts teacher in LA loses 9.54 months of learning per year compared to a student assigned to a teacher of average effectiveness. Dr. Raj Shetty, professor of economics at Harvard, said that a student assigned to a grossly ineffective teacher loses $50,000 in potential lifetime earnings compared to a student assigned to a teacher of average effectiveness. A classroom of 28 children loses $1.4 million in lifetime earnings. That's a classroom of 28 children. If only 3% of California's 275,000 teachers are grossly ineffective, and each teaches only 25 students per year, students lose $11.6 billion in lifetime earnings each year. So it is definitely impactful. In areas like South Los Angeles and in East Los Angeles, what we discovered is that some of these statutes, we're trying to change 5 statutes. One is around tenure, right? You can't remove tenure. Federally, you can't remove tenure for any public employee, right? So it's not going to happen. But what we're trying to do is to say, look, if you have a teacher who is in the system for 16 months, maybe it's not enough time to grant them tenure. Consider giving them 3 to 5 years. Observe them, make an assessment, give them time to see if it works for them, if they're going to be effective teachers in the long term. Other states do it, we can do it too. So that's number one. That's how we're trying to reform tenure. The other one is seniority. Right now, if you have a teacher in the system that's been in the system for 30 years, and there are budget cuts in the state of California to education, that means that a newer teacher who just came in will be let go, okay? And what we won't take into account is the quality of instruction in the classroom. We'll just say, you're let go because you're new, and that statute is called last in, first out. Well, we might think, well, okay, we have some great teachers who have been in the system 30 years, and that makes sense. They've worked toward that seniority. It makes sense. But if we look at areas like schools in South Los Angeles and East Los Angeles, where you have, again, high crime rates, violence, unsafe neighborhoods, and you have a large number of new teachers. When there are cuts in the state of California to the budget, those are the teachers who are let go. And in some cases, in some schools, we saw 70% of their teachers being pink slipped. And that would happen year after year after year. So when the teachers who have seniority, let's say they may not be necessarily in a school, they may be in the school district, when they are sent to those schools because of seniority, they may be there for 1 or 2 days and say, this is not for me, I'm leaving. So we'll get a substitute, and we'll get another substitute, and we'll get another substitute over the course of weeks, over the course of months, maybe a full school year. We know for a fact that having an ineffective teacher, and that could be, a series of substitutes over the course of a full year, will put a student behind for a year and a half. If you put that child in a classroom with an ineffective teacher, or in that situation that I just described, year after year after year, that child will never, ever catch up. Now, I'll tell you why I got involved in this case, because we have a very powerful teachers union in the state of California. Very powerful. I'll tell you why I got involved. Because the first time, as you heard in the video, that my child got an ineffective teacher in 2nd grade, and I didn't know this was happening for months. She was saying, you don't have to do your homework, you don't have to do math because you're just not good at math. And she said that to me. So that's how I know my daughter wasn't making it up. But when it happened in 2nd grade, and we tutored her all of 3rd grade and worked with a phenomenal teacher in 3rd grade. And by the way, the principal of the school, halfway through 2nd grade, said to me, it's not your daughter, it's the teacher. And we know it, so we're going to move her to a new classroom with a phenomenal teacher. And she's brand new, and she's exciting. My daughter flourished. But that teacher was let go the next year because of last in, first out. So she was a phenomenal teacher, but here she is being let go. 4th grade, it happens again. Tutor her all of 5th grade. Put her in another school. She gets a phenomenal teacher. Phenomenal. My daughter scores very highly on ELA and math, English language art and math. And that teacher's let go the following year because he was last in, so he's the first out when their budget cuts. So over and over and over again, we saw this happen. And we thought, my husband and I thought, if we are providing tutoring to our child, what's happening to those kids in East Los Angeles and South Los Angeles and other parts of the state where you don't have college-educated parents? What do? They'll never move ahead. They'll never make it into college. Another issue that we found was kids are getting into college, but they're not prepared. So they'll meet all the requirements, they'll get in, and they'll drop out the 1st and 2nd year. And the students, the high school students, will tell you themselves, they've been accepted to these great colleges, they're excited, but they know, they say, I am not prepared. I'm scared, I'm not prepared. So this is an issue that affects everyone. I'm sure it's very complex. You may have a lot of questions, and so I'd be very interested to hear them. I think we have a responsibility to the kids. We're all taxpayers. We pay for these schools. Let's get informed about these issues, and let's support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Question from Francisco Wong-Diaz.
Being a professor of the fact, I can see how the kids can get lost in trouble, and right now with the problems of autonomous immigration, everything gets politicized beyond the union level situation. I agree with you about the union activities and how powerful they are, and the problems of tenure, the last in, first out. But now you have situations like, for example, in San Francisco, we have communities, districts, where you have a heavy immigration population. How many of them are not respectful? And they're not asking for control over the school, the district. We want to have members of the board who can vote for president and representative, senator, but they're going to be allowed to serve on the local board. So that's creating a reaction against this type of issue. And the real problem is educating the kids is subsumed under the larger issue of immigration. You know, lots of immigrants here, they want to come to schools, they want one more from Sacramento, that kind of thing. So how do you plan to separate those things that you need to do?
You're absolutely right. The issue is very politicized. So the way that we're trying to do it is through this lawsuit case, we're saying, look, it's not just a poverty issue, it's across the board. And by the way, the superintendent of LAUSD said, please bring me into this case because I have so much evidence that shows that it's about the instruction. It's not about the poverty. It's not about that. That's all superfluous, really. It's in the background. It's important, but it's in the background. The issue is immigration. Is instruction in the classroom. So the one is through this case, we're creating awareness that it affects everybody, okay, regardless of where you live. The other one is the districts, the school districts are beginning to show that certain schools with large number of immigrant children who are English learners are really going above and beyond. And those students, irrespective of the fact that they're learning English as a second language, are scoring high in math and science and very much above average in English language arts. So there are models. The question is, how do we get the media to continuously shift away from the political discussion and focus on the factual, statistical information?
Years ago, I was the dean of the bilingual division for the Miami Dade, and that was the time when people began to react against bilingualism. So we had to change it from the bilingual division to the Inter-American Center. But that might be a solution in those areas that you have lots of members of one particular ethnic group. Getting bilingual teaching into the curriculum, and the kids can learn just as fast their own original language as they learn English, and this allows two languages and learn the material. But now I'm switching to bilingualism.
Yeah, I vote for bilingualism too. Chiki has a comment.
You raise a number of interesting points. The first to me is an obvious one, which is 16 months. It does not make sense. In schools, imagine that there should be like universities and there should be tenure, then they should adopt the kinds of tenure policies that exist in universities, and 3 to 5 makes a lot more sense. There's no question in my mind that makes sense. The second point, which you don't make explicit, but you do use the example, the horror example of substitute after substitute, and that people get pink slip. Well, it's called the underfunding of schools. And part of that has been addressed through the more recent effort in which Californians, for the first time in decades, actually voted to tax themselves with schools in mind. But that's part of the pink slipping and pink slipping. It's not just happening. It's because the schools are underfunded. You raised a third point, which is we should not be politicizing this. And so my response is it can always be political. I mean, there's just no way out. Now, the attempt to think about this in a depoliticized manner, that's a political strategy. And I can understand that as a strategy, but it is a political strategy to say just look at the facts. And it's true, you can find some schools with high levels of English language second learners and poor, but those tend to be the exceptions to the rule. There is a correlation between family background and the composition of the school and certain kinds of outcomes. And lastly, the point I want to make is that I'm very sympathetic to you because I actually yanked my kid out of it, and it was in a very pricey neighborhood with a pricey school. And so I do understand it can happen in all kinds of places. But what constitutes good instruction is really difficult to get. Now, my favorite example for myself is measure my quality by looking at where my students go. And that's called selection bias. But selection bias is my lover. Okay? If you measure the quality of my instruction by looking at where my students end up, man, I look like Mr. Chips. But that's because we admit like 5.7% of the people who apply to graduate school. So there's an inherent problem in attempts to evaluate. And I'm not saying you should not evaluate instruction, but if you just look at test grades, and we're not randomly assigning students to different teachers, because it would be unethical to do that. But if you really wanted to test the thesis, that's what you do. You randomly assign students to different teachers to see whether, in fact, there really is an instructional causal effect. Absent that, it does make sense to think in terms of multiple indicators instead of just test scores. I mean, any good Princeton review person can guarantee you that they'll get your kid 50 points up. But they won't but the kid won't know more math. The kid will know how to take tests. And so that's, so I really want to hammer your first point I really endorse, and your sort of overall kind of assessment I endorse, but it is difficult to measure instruction.
Well, first I want to say, can we recruit you, Cheeky? But you're right. I mean, look, excuse me. The local control funding formula is what you're talking about with regard to additional new funding for California schools through Governor Jerry Brown. Yes, it's needed. It's not necessarily more funding, just so you know. It's interesting because he presents it as being more funding, but it's not. It's actually a new formula on how school districts need to manage their funding. And they need to put more money for English language learners, for instance, or for low-income children, for instance, and foster care children, because they're the ones who are falling behind the most, right? So that, I guess, new configuration creates more accountability, which I like. But in terms of instruction in the classroom, I'll give you an example. So the district will say, we need to invest that money, and we'll put $15 million, let's say, to hire, more counselors. And that's great, let's hire more counselors. How are we holding them accountable? How do we know those counselors are effective? Right? It's like with any other type of employment. So that's what we're saying. We're saying, look, don't just hire people. I think it's great, but just create some system of accountability. In terms of how do you know if a teacher's being effective? You're absolutely right. I mean, it's almost like a Pandora's box. There's so many different ways, but I'll tell you this. Teachers know who the effective teachers are in their own school and who the ineffective teachers are. Principals know, parents know, the students know. Okay? In addition to that, for the longest time when we had the CSTs, the California test scores, I'd look at the test scores and undoubtedly, and irrespective of what everybody else says, I'm just a parent and a policy analyst too, but I'd look at the test scores and I'd compare them with the level of learning, how much my daughter learned in a year, my daughters learned in a school year, and believe it or not, they matched. So if they had a great teacher, those scores went up. If they had an ineffective teacher, those scores went down. So it was very easy for me to walk into the principal's office and say, what's happening? Knowing full well that there was nothing I could do. That's just me. I don't think any other parent did that, but I did.
Yeah, I think Evelyn, is sort of touching on the fundamental role of the parent.
Right.
Which is another thing that, yes. Quick question from Masood, and I want to try to break for lunch.
How do you find a good art teacher?
A good art teacher. A good art teacher is one that keeps the kids engaged. I mean, it really is about engagement. And, I know where you're going, in what direction you're leaning, and I think it's important to specify what we're talking about here is core academics. We're talking about the type of courses that are going to get a kid into college. If they're going in that direction, because we also know that not everybody is going that way. Or we'll provide basic skills so that a student can get into a technical career of choice, right? So that's what we're talking about. But I mean, it's not so much about art and dance and music. And even then, I can say to you, because even then I can say to you, it's important that the teacher, my opinion, this is as a parent, shows up, is interested in teaching the kids, isn't just teaching them videos, as I was saying, over and over and over again. I mean, it's very clear, I think, to parents and students and teachers what an effective teacher is, even for a course like art.
When you want to go to college, they don't care about the art. Usually, your math or English is good.
Yeah, so that's the point I was making. We're focusing on those courses. When we're talking about effective teacher, we're looking at the fundamentals. The fundamental.
All right.
Thank you, Evelyn.
You're welcome.
Bye.